country. I think about my own constituency where I could walk into a classroom, any one of our primary schools, you'll hear over 50 languages. Those children are contributing to UK life. They're enriching UK life. And I think we need to get away from this division and making out the othering of people who may look and sound different to us and actually celebrate diversity in all its forms.
Good to have you here, Oliver speaking. What you are about to watch is one of those moments where political rhetoric runs straight into reality because Florence Eshalomi tries to sell diversity as enrichment, while Leila Cunningham keeps dragging the discussion back to cost, enforcement, and who is actually paying for all of this. This starts with a familiar Labour line about migration bringing value, but it quickly turns when Leila refuses to let broad slogans carry the debate and starts pressing on wages, welfare, housing, and the fact that laws mean nothing if they are barely enforced. And that is why this clip matters, because it is not just a disagreement over immigration. It is a direct clash between what politicians say sounds good and what voters think they are actually living with. If you want more breakdowns that focus on what really holds up when these arguments get tested, make sure you like the video and subscribe. It helps more than you think. Now let's get into it.
I haven't seen the article and I think, frankly, it's just wrong. My understanding, I'm trying to think the last census, 2021?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was about 82% whites in the UK, about 18% BME. So this notion that, the UK has been taken over is frankly incorrect. And I think it's about how we recognise that in some parts of the country, we may have an issue in terms of illegal immigration, but actually we need to talk up the benefits of migration and talk about the benefits that many people from such different diverse backgrounds have brought to the country. I think about my own constituency where I could walk into a classroom, any one of our primary schools, you'll hear over 50 languages. Those children are contributing to UK life. They're enriching UK life. And I think we need to get away from this division and making out the othering of people who may look and sound different to us and actually celebrate diversity in all its forms.
And the reason why we have stagnant wages is that we have imported foreign cheap labour and the wages are so cheap that they cannot support themselves. And what you have is the British taxpayer is supporting those that have just arrived in the country because they cannot support themselves. And that is a government policy. You do have foreigners who enter this country who do have access to welfare and benefits, and British people find that offensive and they find that unfair. If I go to a different country, I cannot claim welfare. You know that refugees in some councils in London go to the top of the housing list.
Immigration are automatically able to claim benefits.
No, I said
that's incorrect.
Well, they get housing.
That's incorrect.
They get housing. They do get housing. Refugees don't get housing.
That's incorrect.
Are you saying refugees? Are you saying refugees? Where are they housed?
Benefits.
Where are they housed? Is housing not a benefit?
That's incorrect.
Is housing a benefit, Florence?
Yeah, because we should help people who are destitute.
So they do claim benefits. Number one, they have legal aid should they commit a crime. That is all paid by the taxpayer and the British taxpayer. And we have. You ask the British people, they do think there's been too much legal immigration. Of course, illegal migration is a huge problem and it flourished under the Tories and it's flourishing under Labour. We've had record amount of people. And the reason is that you both both your parties refuse to treat illegal immigrants as criminals when they arrive. It is illegal to enter our country.
We changed the law to make that expressively so. The 22 Act made it a criminal offence to come here in a small boat.
And do you know how many was prosecuted under your government for illegal immigration?
It had only just come in.
1%. Because
it had only just come in. We changed the law to do that.
Who cares about the law? If the law's not implemented, who cares about it? You didn't have the political will to implement it. Only 1% of illegal migrants were prosecuted under that law.
We changed the law in 2020.
What you just watched is a very clean example of how political language can collapse the moment it is forced to deal with consequences. At the centre of this exchange are two completely different ways of talking about immigration. Florence Eshalomi speaks in the language of diversity, inclusion, and social contribution. She points to a classroom with more than 50 languages and presents that as proof of a vibrant and enriched society. That is not a technical argument. It is a moral and cultural one. She is trying to frame migration through aspiration, tolerance, and national openness. Leila Cunningham does the opposite. She takes the conversation out of symbolism and puts it into cost, enforcement, and public burden. She talks about imported, cheap labour, stagnant wages, welfare access, housing support, legal aid, and the failure to prosecute illegal arrivals even where the law exists. That is a material argument. It is designed to land with people who are less interested in rhetoric and more interested in who pays, who benefits, and who carries the consequences. And that is the real clash here. Eshalomi is arguing from sentiment and social vision. Cunningham is arguing from pressure and measurable impact. That is why the debate feels so sharp. They are not actually answering the same question. One is describing the country she wants to praise. The other is describing the system she thinks is failing. Now look at the moment that really changes the exchange. Florence Eshalomi says refugees do not get housing. Leila Cunningham immediately presses back, and this is where the problem begins for Labour. Because once that statement is challenged, the debate moves away from broad principles and into practical reality. Where are they housed? Who covers it? Is housing support a public benefit? Once those questions enter the discussion, a slogan is no longer enough. This is where reality versus rhetoric becomes the whole story. Because politicians often survive on language that sounds generous, compassionate, and socially advanced. But once someone asks what that actually means in administrative terms, housing lists, welfare access, legal aid, local pressure, the emotional shield starts to weaken. That is exactly what happens here. Now, to be precise, there is an important distinction between asylum seekers, refugees, and other migrants. Those categories are often collapsed in public argument, even though the rules around status and entitlement differ. That matters analytically. But politically, what viewers often hear is something much simpler. People arrive, support is provided, local strain increases, and the taxpayer picks up the bill. That is the perception Cunningham is speaking to, and she does it very deliberately. Then the argument moves to wages. This is another strong tactical move. When Cunningham talks about cheap labour suppressing pay, she is linking immigration to economic stagnation for ordinary workers. That is a powerful frame because it shifts the discussion from morality to class interest. It says this is not just about borders, it is about the bargaining power of British workers and whether government policy is actively undercutting them. Labour struggles with this line of attack because it sits in an awkward place. If Labour defends migration too broadly, it risks sounding dismissive of wage pressure and public concern. If it concedes too much, it weakens its own multicultural and humanitarian framing. That tension is visible all through this clip. Then comes the enforcement argument, and this is where Cunningham scores again. She points to the 2022 law making small boat arrival a criminal offence and then pivots straight to implementation. How many were actually prosecuted? The answer raised in the exchange is around 1%. Whether every viewer knows the legal detail does not even matter at that point. The political point lands anyway. A law that is barely enforced does not reassure anyone. It makes the whole system look performative. That is one of the strongest moments in the entire clip, because Cunningham is not just saying the system is weak. She is saying both major parties are engaged in theatre. One side passes laws it will not enforce. The other side talks compassion while avoiding the bill. And for voters who already believe the political class does not mean what it says, that argument has. There is also a deeper communication lesson here. Florence Eshalomi keeps trying to elevate the discussion into values. Leila Cunningham keeps dragging it back down into mechanics. Values can inspire people. Mechanics determine whether the argument survives scrutiny. When one side is speaking in ideals and the other is speaking in costs, lists, prosecutions, and material trade-offs, the side with the harder edge often sounds more convincing, especially in a short clip. That does not automatically make every claim correct. It means the structure is stronger under pressure. And that matters, because politics today is full of representatives who speak fluently about inclusion, fairness, and compassion, but become much less confident when they are asked specific operational questions. Who gets access? Under what rule? At what cost? With what enforcement? Those are the questions that expose whether someone actually understands the system they are defending. So what does this moment actually show? It shows a Labour MP leaning on rhetoric that sounds noble, but becomes unstable once challenged on the details. It shows a reform challenger who understands that the fastest way to break a polished political message is to force it into concrete terms. And it shows why immigration remains such a volatile issue, because the gap between how elites describe it and how many voters experience it is still very wide. This exchange does not settle the immigration debate. It does not answer every legal or policy question. But it does reveal which side came ready to defend a worldview and which side came ready to test whether that worldview can survive contact with reality. And for you as a viewer, that is the method worth keeping. When a politician talks about values, ask what those values cost. When a politician talks about compassion, ask how the system works in practice. When a politician points to a law, ask whether it is actually being enforced. That is how you cut through the performance. If you want more breakdowns that focus on pressure points, weak arguments, and what actually happens when political rhetoric gets tested, make sure you like the video and subscribe.